going to the end zone. Man is open. Caught! And he is sacked. Touchdown. Redskins down. Robert Griffin III.
It's the Redskins at one.
RG3 electrifying all the way.
On the Sports Fix. Sports Fix. Now, here's Kevin Sheehan and Tom Libero.
You know, it says, Mike asked me if I was okay. I said yes. I'm the quarterback of this team. My job is to be out there if I can play. The only time I couldn't play is when I went down. I took myself out the game. So that's just the way you have to play it.
That was RG3 after the Seattle game. Kevin Sheehan, Tom Libero. It's Skins at 1 as part of the Sports Fix, and it's brought to you by Farish Chrysler Dodge Jeep in the heart of Fairfax. We've been talking throughout the show about J.R. Moehringer's article, which will appear in ESPN the Magazine, this week's issue about Robert Griffin III. And J.R. is kind enough to join us, and we appreciate it. J.R. Moehringer, for those that don't know, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and he wrote this story on RG3. And before we get to the Seattle game part of your story, just give everybody, including Tommy and I, just a quick 10-second on what this story was about, because I know it wasn't about the Seattle game. The Seattle game stuff just came out.
Well, it tries to get at the importance of RG3 and why he has captured the imagination of fans, not just in D.C., but across the country. While I was working on it, the NFL announced that his jersey is the best-selling jersey of all time. And I think that really says something about the connection fans have made with a young quarterback with a short resume. It's not based on his stats, this love of RG3. So I try to get it at what it is based on.
JR, he is by far and away maybe the most important athlete, the most charismatic and dynamic athlete that this town's had on its most important team in forever. And so we have, since that Seattle game, debated, and the fans have debated and argued what happened during that game ad nauseum. And so This is a new piece to the story when you write, and he says in the story about the Seattle game, with what happened and how everything was running, again, referring to the Seattle game, you take me out. If that happened again next year, I'd come out of the game and sit until I was 100% healthy. Do you have a feel for who you is when he says about that game, you take me out?
No, I don't. I have guesses and instincts. I felt in the room when he was saying that he was talking about Shanahan, but he doesn't say specifically whom he's referring to, and I'm not sure that he knows. And I'm not sure if that's because he's confused or because he's trying not to call out his coach or his leaders, and it could be a little bit of both. He's parsing his words so carefully, and he's trying to take the responsibility on his own shoulders. But it's clear that he's not happy with how it went down, and at least part of him is still struggling with who's at fault and whose responsibility it is. I think you can't understand what happened in the Seattle game unless you look at what happened at Baylor. Such a similar injury. And I think he's trying to piece these two injuries together and see them as one thing, and trying to figure out what he's supposed to do the next time he's in pain in a game.
JR, you talked about fault and responsibility, and I think they're two different things. And I think could go a long way towards stopping a lot of this debate and speculation if he said, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, it's my responsibility. I mean, everything that happens on that sideline is my responsibility. That would seem to be the right thing to do at this point, no matter who Robert is trying to point fingers at or not point fingers at.
Well, I think you're right, and I think that there's a reason he's not doing that. And I think that there's some tension there. The fact that he's not saying that is significant, and there's a very important piece in my story where Kirk Cousins talks about overhearing them talking on the sidelines, and Shanahan telling him, "You're limping, you should come out," and RG3 is saying, "No, I want to stay in," and it sounds like it was pretty intense, this conversation, and I don't think that they've sorted it out. I think they've agreed not to share what they're feeling with the rest of us, but I don't think that they have connected and had, a resolution to this situation. And I don't know if they have I don't know what the relationship is there, but I also think it's very significant that when RG3 talks about the surgery after that Seattle game, and everybody being in the room when he woke up, Dan Snyder and the head of PR for the team and his parents and his fiance, there's some people noticeably missing from the roster. And I draw some significance from that. Maybe everybody else won't. But there's some people missing in the room, and I wonder why.
I don't know what Robert's inner circle is, but I've covered athletes who are big names who have large inner circles. And it's part of what's going on here is that he may have different factions of that inner circle pulling at him, like, in his ear, saying, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. Is that in play at all?
I feel very strongly that you're right, that you're onto something. There's a pretty large apparatus around him, and just in the brief dealing I've had with it, my feeling is he's not being well served by it. He's being protected, and I don't know why you would ever protect somebody who's as thoughtful and well-spoken and well-educated and just capable as this guy. He's being protected. He's being parsed out. He's getting a lot of different advice. He was sitting there getting made up. He's got 2 phones in his hand. He's got people whispering in his ear. I just don't think that's good for him. I've seen other athletes surrounded by that kind of, apparatus, that kind of that kind of team entourage, and it's not healthy. And he'll figure that out for himself, but I hope he does it sooner rather than later, because it's really off-putting. And again, I don't think it's necessary. But when you've got the kind of meteoric rise he's had, the number of sponsors, the size of the contract, the importance to the fan base that you've described, maybe it's inevitable in the beginning that the athletes have to work through this, but it's regrettable. I just don't like it, and maybe it's the future. Maybe the bigger the athlete, the bigger the apparatus around them, but no one is well served by it except for the people in that group around him.
Yeah,
those are the only people who are happy about the way his life is organized right now.
We're talking to J.R. Moehringer. He's written a story for ESPN the Magazine on RG3. Actually, just real quickly on that point, do you get a sense in terms of the group around him that he is being influenced by them in terms of some of the things that he's been saying, and B, do you sense sort of an anti-somebody, anti-Shanahan or anti-somebody in the organization bent from that group around?
No,
him?
I can't say that.
Okay.
I have no idea who's got the stronger influence over him. I mean, he's very close with his parents and his fiance, and I think they have. If I had to guess, I'd say they have the most influence over him. But that buffer he's got between him and people like me, people like yourselves, fans, I think that's unhealthy. That's just too much noise in his ear. I'm not naive enough to think that there should be no one filtering and protecting, but it doesn't feel very organized, the system that he's got around himself. And it doesn't, for this profile, for instance, the way they limited access, it was, as I say, very off-putting. I mean, providing nobody at all in his life to answer questions. I ran across this with other athletes, and I watched it lead to bad things. I watched it when you've got disorganization around you like that. You wind up just not connecting in a real way with the fans. You've got too many people between you and the outside world, and you wind up being in a kind of a bubble. So you lose. Your tone is off. You become tone deaf, and you don't know what people are saying, and you don't know how what you say is going to be heard. Maybe it's just my own personal prejudice, because of course I have my dog in this fight. You know, I want access and as much as I can get. But still, just as an observer, I don't really like the way his life is organized.
And, you know, from the outside looking in, this guy seems like a tremendous communicator. I watched him in his weekly press conferences at a Redskins Park last year, where hardly scripted, didn't know what question was coming, was witty, was quick. And at one point, I know this is a stupid little thing, but at one point with the flight pattern to Dulles Airport and planes flying over, he would stop talking when the plane would be over so it wouldn't be drowned out by the cameras. I've never seen an athlete that aware of what was going on in front of him than that guy.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, he's so impressive in person. So I can understand protecting an athlete who's just not as capable. But why would you protect this guy? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Why would you respect to the people around him or to him and make it difficult to get to know him? Because that's what they're doing. Yeah, when you sit down and talk to him, I mean, this is a guy who voluntarily, as I say in the piece, studied Latin in college, blew away his professors, his coach, the president of the college. I went to Waco. I talked to everybody at Baylor. I mean, people would tear up talking about this guy. And also just, I mean, the stories about his dedication in class, not only being a full-time superstar athlete and having a full course load and a girlfriend, but also volunteering a lot, working with a lot of charities, and tutoring his fellow students in subjects. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't need to be sheltered, and so it just feels like a waste.
This is a guy.
And
This is a
like
guy,
a
Jr.,
people,
who's superhuman. You know that, right?
Well, if he's superhuman, then he needs to break through this a fortress of solitude that people are trying to put him in.
Listen, a couple of things that you said that I just want to follow up on specific to the Seattle game. You said that it's clear that he's not happy with what happened, but that he's not necessarily sure why. And you also said that there's definite tension there between him and potentially Mike Shanahan. Your gut is that it's Mike Shanahan. Does he realize that every time he is not definitive and he says something like "you take me out," which is open to interpretation, that it's just sort of the feeling in town that things aren't right, and yet we can't get to the bottom of it. And I'm wondering why you think, because you say also he's very measured and he measures his words with a T-square and a protractor. Why he's putting that out there periodically like he has to make us sort of, sort through this without really knowing what the answer is?
Well, I think when you try and talk around something, when you try and say something without really saying it, or you try not to say something, that's when you're going to get in trouble. So it feels like he's trying. I'm almost certain he's trying not to say exactly how he feels, and that's a difficult thing to do. So we all know that. But let me just be clear. I didn't say it's definitive that there's tension there. My feeling, my instinct, is that there's some tension. And it's not. It feels like they're not on the same page. That's what it feels like. It feels like they haven't resolved this. So I mean, that's a specific kind of tension. I don't mean to imply that they're not getting along. I don't know if they are or not. I just think it's significant that Shanahan and Kyle weren't in the room when he woke up from surgery, and everyone else with the organization was, of importance. That feels like it might mean something. And the way he's talking without clarity and without being really specific about who was at fault, it just feels like they're not. And as you say, Shanahan not saying it was his fault. It just feels like they're not on the same page.
JR, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Hey, JR, one thing. I loved Resurrecting the Champ, the book.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
The story. I recommend anybody to read what this guy writes because he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. Enough said.